Get him out of my ER! Get this garbage out of my ER before I have you arrested! Dr. Richard Pemberton's voice cuts through Metropolitan General Hospital like a whip, his white coat pristine, gold watch glinting as he glares at a black man holding his unconscious mother. Please! She can't breathe! I don't give a damn what sob story you're selling. Pemberton steps closer, voice dripping venom. This isn't some street clinic for your kind. The ER goes dead silent. Nurses freeze mid-step. Patients stop scrolling their phones. Security guards shift nervously. The elderly woman's lips turn blue under harsh fluorescent lights. Her son's hands tremble, but his voice stays steady. Sir, she needs help now. What she needs is to get out. Pemberton smirks. Before I make you both disappear. But Dr. Pemberton has no idea who he's talking to, and that ignorance will cost him everything. 4 hours earlier, Dr. Jeremiah Washington sat in his mother's kitchen, watching her measure insulin with the precision of a retired school teacher. Rosa Washington, 73 years old, had taught 3rd grade for 42 years. Her hands still moved with classroom confidence. Baby, you don't need to hover over me like I'm helpless. Her voice carried the same authority that once commanded rowdy 8-year-olds. The scent of her evening tea, chamomile with honey, filled the small Detroit kitchen. Jeremiah smiled, adjusting his simple polo shirt. Tomorrow, he will trade casual clothes for surgical scrubs as Metropolitan General's new chief medical officer. But tonight, he was just Rosa's son, making sure she took her heart medication. Mom, after what happened last month, he touched the pill organizer she'd knocked over during her previous cardiac episode. The plastic rattled against the Formica counter. That was nothing but stress. Rosa waved him off, settling into her favorite armchair. The leather creaked under her weight, worn smooth by decades of evening news and crossword puzzles. Jeremiah had earned his medical degree from Johns Hopkins, completed trauma surgery residency at Walter Reed, served 3 tours as an Army combat medic in Afghanistan, but in this house, he remained the little boy who scraped his knees and needed Band-Aids. The living room walls displayed Rosa's legacy. 42 class photos, hundreds of thank you cards from former students, a framed letter from the Detroit School Board praising her dedication. The afternoon sun streaming through lace curtains illuminated a lifetime of service. Dr. Washington. Jeremiah tested the title silently. Monday morning, he would walk into the Metropolitan General with authority over every department, every decision, every doctor, including Dr. Richard Pemberton. He'd researched Pemberton thoroughly. 8 years as emergency chief, excellent surgical skills, but the whispered complaints troubled him. Delayed treatment for certain patients, insurance questions before medical assessment, subtle discrimination disguised as efficiency. The hospital board had hired Jeremiah specifically to address these issues. Metropolitan General served Detroit's most diverse neighborhoods, yet leadership remained overwhelmingly white and increasingly disconnected from their patient population. His phone buzzed with text messages from colleagues congratulating him on the appointment. Dr. Sarah Carter from Hopkins, "You'll change everything there." Dr. Marcus Johnson from Walter Reed, "Detroit's lucky to have you." But Jeremiah kept his new position secret from Rosa. She worried enough about his transition from military to civilian medicine. Adding the pressure of a high-profile administrative role seemed unnecessary. "Turn up the volume, baby." Rosa pointed her remote at the television. The evening news anchor discussed rising healthcare costs, medical bankruptcies, families choosing between medications and groceries. 40 years I taught those children, Rosa murmured, and now they can't afford to get sick. Jeremiah watched his mother's profile in the flickering television light. Her generation had lived through segregation, integration, and the slow progress toward equality. Yet here they were in 2024, still fighting battles she thought were won decades ago. The neighborhood outside reflected Detroit's complex revival. Young professionals bought renovated houses next to longtime residents like Rosa. Coffee shops and art galleries mixed with corner stores and community centers. Progress came unevenly, sometimes creating tension between old and new. The Metropolitan General sat at the heart of this change. A Level 1 trauma center serving everyone from downtown executives to minimum wage workers. The emergency room saw gunshot victims and heart attacks, overdoses and accidents, the full spectrum of urban medicine. Jeremiah had studied the hospital's demographics carefully. 60% of patients were minorities, but only 20% of attending physicians shared that background. Worse, patient satisfaction scores showed clear disparities in treatment quality based on race and insurance status. Tomorrow would begin his mission to change that culture, but tonight he was simply a son ensuring his mother's evening medications were properly organized. "You know what I'm proud of?" Rosa's voice carried across the small room. "Raising a man who serves others. First the Army, now medicine. Your daddy would be so proud." James Washington had died in Vietnam when Jeremiah was 3. Rosa raised him alone, working double shifts to pay for his education while never missing a parent-teacher conference or school play. "I learned service from you, Mom." Jeremiah squeezed her hand. Her skin felt paper-thin, but her grip remained strong. The evening news continued its litany of problems: healthcare inequality, institutional bias, patients denied care. Rosa shook her head at each story. "When will people learn that dignity isn't about money or color?" she asked the television screen. "Soon," Jeremiah thought silently. "Very soon." The chest pain hit Rosa like lightning during the 10 o'clock news. She gasped, clutching her left arm as the remote clattered to the floor. The sharp scent of spilled tea filled the air as her mug crashed against the coffee table. "Mom!" Jeremiah dropped his medical journal, his combat medic training kicking in instantly. Rosa's face had gone gray, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool evening air. "Can't breathe," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the television's drone. Jeremiah checked her pulse, rapid and irregular at 110 beats per minute. Her skin felt clammy, cold to the touch like wet clay. Classic signs of cardiac distress. He needed to get her to a hospital immediately. "We're going to the Metropolitan General. Right now." He lifted Rosa gently, her small frame trembling against his chest. The familiar weight reminded him of carrying wounded soldiers, except this time it was his mother. The drive took 12 minutes through empty Detroit streets lined with flickering streetlights. Rosa's breathing grew more labored with each traffic light, her chest rising in short, desperate gasps. Jeremiah's hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white, forcing himself to stay calm while his mother's life hung in the balance. Metropolitan General's emergency entrance blazed with harsh white light that made the concrete glow like daylight. Ambulances lined the circular drive, their red strobes painting urgent patterns across parked cars. The automatic doors swooshed open with mechanical precision, releasing a wave of antiseptic air and medical urgency. Jeremiah carried Rosa through the chaos. The ER buzzed with Friday night activity, gunshot victims bleeding through gauze, overdose patients thrashing on gurneys, accident casualties moaning behind thin curtains. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency between curtain bays while heart monitors beeped their electronic warnings like digital heartbeats. The triage desk stood like a fortress at the room's center, surrounded by plastic chairs filled with worried families. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unforgiving brightness. The smell of disinfectant mixed with fear and desperation. Nurse Janet Rodriguez looked up from her computer screen, her tired eyes immediately focusing on Rosa's distressed breathing. 20 years of emergency medicine had taught her to recognize real distress instantly. "What's the problem tonight?" Rodriguez reached for her stethoscope, professional concern evident in her voice and movements. "Chest pain radiating down her left arm. Started about 20 minutes ago during the news." Jeremiah's voice stayed steady despite his racing heart. "She's diabetic and has a history of cardiac issues. Take metformin and lisinopril daily." Rodriguez nodded, beginning her assessment with swift efficiency. Blood pressure cuff around Rosa's thin arm, digital thermometer under her tongue, pulse oximeter clipped to her finger. The routine dance of emergency medicine unfolded with practiced precision. "Insurance card?" Rodriguez asked, already reaching for admission paperwork while monitoring Rosa's vitals. Jeremiah produced Rosa's Medicare card and Blue Cross supplemental insurance. Everything in order, everything legitimate. His mother had worked 42 years to earn comprehensive health care coverage that should guarantee respect and proper treatment. "Okay, Mrs. Washington, let's get you comfortable in Bay 3. Rodriguez guided them toward the cardiac assessment area, her movements conveying both urgency and professional reassurance. "We'll get an EKG started right away." That's when Dr. Richard Pemberton emerged from the doctor's station like a storm cloud. Pemberton moved through the ER like he owned every tile, every breath of air. His white coat was immaculate, pressed to perfection, expensive Italian shoes clicking against polished floors with military precision. Other staff stepped aside automatically, deferring to his authority with practiced subservience born from years of institutional hierarchy. His eyes swept the waiting area like a security camera, cataloging patients with cold efficiency. When his gaze landed on Jeremiah and Rosa, something shifted in his expression. Disgust flickered across his features like a shadow, followed by something worse, dismissive contempt. "Rodriguez." His voice cut through the medical chatter like a scalpel. "What's the situation here?" "Elderly female, chest pain with arm radiation. Blood pressure 160/95, pulse irregular at 110, classic cardiac presentation requiring immediate assessment." Rodriguez kept her tone professional, but tension crept into her shoulders like invisible weight. Pemberton approached slowly, his eyes never leaving Jeremiah's face. He studied the simple polo shirt, the worn jeans, the calloused hands of someone who worked for a living. His assessment was swift and completely wrong, filtered through decades of racial bias disguised as medical judgment. Insurance status? Pemberton's question carried undertones that made other patients look up from their phones and magazines. "Medicare with Blue Cross supplemental coverage," Rodriguez replied, holding up the cards. "Everything's current and valid." Pemberton's skepticism was audible, dripping with doubt. He glanced at Rosa's gray face, then back at Jeremiah with obvious suspicion. "These symptoms, they're quite convenient for a Friday night, aren't they?" The words hung in the air like poison gas. Jeremiah felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice level, drawing on military discipline learned under Afghan fire. "Sir, my mother is having a cardiac event. She needs immediate attention." "What she needs," Pemberton stepped closer, invading personal space with deliberate intimidation, "is a realistic assessment of her actual condition versus her perceived condition." Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably, her pen hovering over the intake form. Other nurses exchanged worried glances from behind computer screens. This wasn't standard emergency protocol, and everyone knew it. The air grew thick with tension. "Doctor, her vitals clearly indicate cardiac distress. Protocol requires," Rodriguez began, trying to advocate for proper care. "I'll determine what her vitals indicate." Pemberton's tone brooked no argument, sharp as broken glass. "How often do we see these exaggerated presentations on Friday nights? People looking for pain medication, a warm bed, maybe a quick insurance payout?" The accusation hit like a physical blow to the chest. Jeremiah felt his military composure straining against rising anger that threatened to boil over. Around them, the ER's normal sounds continued, beeping monitors, urgent conversations, the squeak of gurney wheels, but their little corner had become a bubble of toxic tension. "My mother taught elementary school for 42 years, Jeremiah said quietly, each word carefully controlled. "She's never asked for anything she didn't earn through honest work?" How touching. Pemberton's smile was arctic, cold enough to freeze blood. "But this is a medical facility, not a social services office. We treat actual emergencies here, not sob stories." Rosa's breathing grew more labored with each passing minute. Her lips showed the faintest blue tinge under the harsh fluorescent lights, a clear sign of oxygen deprivation. Medical training told Jeremiah that every minute of delay increased the risk of permanent cardiac damage or death. "Please," he said, swallowing pride that tasted like acid. "Just examine her. You'll see this is real." "Oh, I'm sure it feels real to her." Pemberton made a deliberate note on his tablet, taking his time. "Stress, anxiety, maybe a little indigestion from too much fried food. Amazing how these symptoms can seem so dramatic." The word dramatic dripped with condescension and racial stereotypes. Other patients had stopped pretending not to watch the unfolding confrontation. A middle-aged white woman shook her head in dismay. A young Latino man held up his phone, clearly recording the entire exchange. Rodriguez looked increasingly uncomfortable, trapped between medical ethics and workplace hierarchy. Dr. Pemberton, hospital protocol requires cardiac assessment within 15 minutes of triage for patients presenting these symptoms. Protocol, Pemberton repeated slowly, savoring each syllable, requires medical judgment over rigid policy compliance, and my professional judgment says this patient can wait while we handle actual emergencies. There are no other cardiac cases currently in triage, Rodriguez pointed out, consulting her computer screen. There are patients with more pressing insurance verification issues to resolve. Pemberton's meaning was unmistakable, coded racism wrapped in administrative language. Patients whose coverage won't require extensive documentation. The racism was subtle but unmistakable to anyone willing to see it. Coded language that maintained plausible deniability while delivering its toxic message. Jeremiah recognized the technique from military briefings about institutional discrimination and systemic bias. "How long do we have to wait?" Jeremiah asked, his voice steady despite Rosa's worsening condition. "As long as it takes." Pemberton turned away dismissively, his white coat billowing like a cape. "Rodriguez, see that they're comfortable in the waiting area, far from the actual patients." The deliberate emphasis on actual patients cut through the ER like a blade. Rosa's hand found Jeremiah's arm, her touch weak and trembling like autumn leaves. "Baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Maybe we should go somewhere else." "No, Mom." Jeremiah's voice carried quiet steel forged in military service. "You deserve care here. We're not leaving." Pemberton paused at the doctor's station, his back still turned but his voice carrying across the entire waiting area. "Some people need to learn that demanding special treatment isn't the same as deserving it." 45 minutes crawled by like hours. Rosa's condition deteriorated with each passing moment. Her skin grew grayer, sweat beading on her forehead despite the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. The blue tinge around her lips deepened, spreading like spilled ink. Jeremiah watched other patients receive immediate attention. A young white woman with a sprained ankle was whisked away within minutes. An elderly white man complaining of indigestion got an immediate EKG. Even a teenager with obvious drug intoxication received faster assessment than Rosa's cardiac emergency. "This is discrimination," whispered Maria Santos, an older Latina woman waiting with her grandson. "I've seen this before. My husband died because they made us wait 6 hours for chest pain." The pattern was unmistakable. Pemberton moved through the ER like a puppet master, orchestrating delays for certain patients while fast-tracking others. His criteria had nothing to do with medical urgency and everything to do with skin color and perceived social status. "Nurse Rodriguez," Pemberton's voice cracked like a whip. "I need those insurance verification forms completed before any treatment begins. Every box checked, every signature verified." Rodriguez looked up from her computer, frustration evident in her tired eyes. "Doctor, Mrs. Washington's insurance is already verified. Medicare and Blue Cross are both current. Then verify it again." Pemberton's smile was predatory. "You know how these government programs can be unreliable. We can't afford to treat patients whose coverage might be denied later." The bureaucratic torture was deliberate and systematic. Forms that should take 5 minutes stretched into hour-long ordeals, required signatures multiplied mysteriously. Insurance verification calls were placed on indefinite hold. Rosa's breathing became increasingly labored. She clutched Jeremiah's hand with diminishing strength, her pulse racing irregularly under her papery skin. Classic signs of cardiac distress were progressing toward cardiac arrest, yet Pemberton maintained his administrative charade. "Blood pressure 180/110, Rodriguez reported quietly to another nurse. "Pulse erratic at 125. She needs immediate intervention." "What she needs," Pemberton interjected, appearing beside them like a vulture, "is patience. Medical care isn't a drive-through service for people who think they can skip the line." The racist implication hung in the air like toxic smoke. Other patients shifted uncomfortably in their plastic chairs. Miguel Santos, the security guard, clenched his fists while watching the deliberate cruelty unfold. Pemberton's psychological warfare intensified with each passing minute. He questioned Rosa's symptom descriptions, suggesting she was exaggerating for attention. He implied that chest pain was often psychosomatic in certain populations. His medical degree became a weapon of discrimination. "Doctor," Jeremiah said carefully, "my mother's medical history shows 3 previous cardiac episodes. This presentation is consistent with acute coronary syndrome requiring immediate intervention." Pemberton's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Are you attempting to practice medicine without a license? Because that's exactly what it sounds like." "I'm describing my mother's documented medical history. What you're doing is questioning my professional judgment." Pemberton stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. "And I don't appreciate medical advice from concerned family members." The pause before concerned family members dripped with implication. Jeremiah recognized the coded language of institutional racism, designed to maintain plausible deniability while delivering maximum humiliation. Around them, the ER buzzed with normal activity. Nurses moved efficiently between patients, doctors consulted over charts, ambulances delivered new emergencies. Yet Rosa Washington sat dying in plain sight while receiving no care whatsoever. "Her oxygen saturation is dropping," Rodriguez reported with growing urgency. 91% and falling. "Then perhaps she should try breathing more effectively," Pemberton suggested with casual cruelty. Amazing how anxiety can affect respiratory function. The medical gaslighting was systematic and vicious. Pemberton used his authority to reinterpret every symptom, dismiss every concern, and delay every intervention. His racism wore a white coat and spoke in medical terminology. Maria Santos pulled out her phone and began recording. "This is murder," she whispered to her grandson. "They're killing that woman with paperwork." Other patients joined the digital documentation. Phones emerged from purses and pockets, capturing Pemberton's discriminatory behavior from multiple angles. The evidence accumulated in real time, uploaded to social media platforms where it began spreading like wildfire. #racist doctor started trending within 20 minutes. #justice for Rosa followed shortly after. The hospital's reputation began crumbling in cyberspace while Rosa's heart struggled in real space. "I need to speak with a supervisor," Jeremiah said quietly. "I am the supervisor," Pemberton replied with obvious satisfaction. "Chief of Emergency Medicine, the highest authority in this department. And my authority says your mother waits until I'm satisfied she deserves treatment." The power dynamics couldn't be clearer. Pemberton held absolute control over life and death decisions, wielding his position like a medieval lord dispensing justice to peasants. His racism was protected by institutional hierarchy and administrative bureaucracy. Rosa's condition reached critical status. Her lips turned distinctly blue, her breathing shallow and rapid. Sweat poured down her face despite the cool air. Every medical indicator screamed cardiac emergency, yet Pemberton maintained his sadistic delay. "Blood pressure 190 over 115, Rodriguez reported with barely controlled panic. "Pulse 130 and irregular. Doctor, she's going into cardiac distress." "Then perhaps," Pemberton said slowly, savoring each word like fine wine, "she should have thought about her heart health before coming to my emergency room with fabricated symptoms." The accusation of fabrication was the final straw. Jeremiah felt his military discipline straining against righteous fury. This wasn't just medical malpractice. It was attempted murder disguised as healthcare administration. "Sir," Jeremiah's voice carried a dangerous quiet, "you're watching my mother die while playing insurance games. That's not medicine. That's something else entirely." "What it is," Pemberton stepped nose to nose with Jeremiah, "is professional medical judgment applied to patients who may not deserve our premium services." The mask had finally slipped. Raw racism emerged from behind medical terminology and administrative procedure. Pemberton's hatred was naked now, exposed for everyone to see and record. Rosa suddenly gasped, her back arching in the waiting room chair. Her hand clutched her chest as pain ripped through her body like lightning. The cardiac episode was reaching its climax, demanding immediate intervention or risking permanent damage. "Mom!" Jeremiah caught her as she slumped forward. "Still acting?" Pemberton asked with clinical detachment. "Amazing how realistic these performances can seem." That's when Rosa lost consciousness entirely. Her body went limp in Jeremiah's arms, her breathing barely perceptible. The woman who had raised him, taught hundreds of children, and dedicated her life to service was dying while surrounded by medical equipment and trained professionals. "She's unconscious!" Rodriguez shouted, grabbing a gurney. "We need cardiac response now!" "What we need," Pemberton said with chilling calm, "is to avoid unnecessary panic over what's probably a fainting spell." But the crowd of patients had seen enough. Phones captured everything as Rosa's son held her limp body, begging for help while a doctor denied basic human decency. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and about to destroy everything Pemberton thought he controlled. Because what Dr. Richard Pemberton didn't know was about to change everything forever. Rosa's body went completely limp in Jeremiah's arms. Her breathing stopped for 3 terrifying seconds before resuming in shallow, desperate gasps. The waiting room held its collective breath as a mother's life hung by a thread. "That's enough!" Jeremiah's voice cut through the chaos like a surgical blade. He stood slowly, gently laying Rosa on the gurney Rodriguez had brought, then turned to face Pemberton with lethal calm. "Dr. Pemberton, I'm Dr. Jeremiah Washington." His words fell like hammer blows in the sudden silence. "Chief Medical Officer of Metropolitan General Hospital starting Monday morning." The ER froze. Nurses stopped mid-step. Patients' phones captured the moment their screens went viral. Pemberton's face drained of color as the words penetrated his consciousness like bullets. Jeremiah reached into his wallet with deliberate precision. His medical license emerged first, active, current, Johns Hopkins Medical School. Then his hospital ID badge, still crisp from HR processing. Finally, the official appointment letter bearing the hospital board's letterhead. "Impossible," Pemberton whispered, his voice cracking like thin ice. "Trauma surgery, Walter Reed Medical Center, 3 combat tours as an Army medic, board certification in emergency medicine and hospital administration." Jeremiah's credentials filled the air like artillery shells. "And as of Monday, your direct supervisor." The power dynamic flipped instantly, completely, irreversibly. Pemberton's world collapsed in real time as hospital security moved closer, drawn by the unfolding drama. "Nurse Rodriguez," Jeremiah's voice carried absolute authority now, "initiated cardiac protocol immediately. IV access, high-flow oxygen, cardiac enzymes, 12-lead EKG. Move." "Yes, doctor." Rodriguez exploded into action, her relief palpable. The nursing staff mobilized like a military unit receiving orders from a respected commander. Pemberton stood paralyzed, watching his career disintegrate before his eyes. The racist doctor who had denied care to a dying woman had just humiliated the new chief medical officer's mother. His mind raced through the implications: termination, lawsuits, medical board hearings, criminal charges. "Security," Jeremiah continued without looking at Pemberton, "escorted Dr. Pemberton to the administrative office. Immediately." Miguel Santos stepped forward with obvious satisfaction. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." This is some kind of mistake," Pemberton stammered, his arrogance crumbling like sand. "I was following proper protocol. I was being thorough." "You were committing medical malpractice." Jeremiah's voice remained deadly calm as he checked Rosa's pulse. In front of 40 witnesses, all of them were recording. The phones had indeed captured everything. Videos were already uploaded to TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. #racist doctor exploded across social media as the footage spread like wildfire. Pemberton's face would be known nationwide within hours. I didn't know who you were," Pemberton whispered desperately. "That's the problem." Jeremiah finally looked at him, his eyes burning with controlled fury. "You didn't care who she was. A human being having a heart attack should be enough." Rosa's eyes fluttered open as oxygen flowed through the nasal cannula. Her color improved immediately, the blue tinge fading from her lips. Proper medical care was already reversing the damage Pemberton's delays had caused. "Baby?" Rosa's voice was weak but clear. "I'm here, Mom. You're going to be fine." Jeremiah squeezed her hand while monitoring her vital signs. "The best cardiac team in Detroit is taking care of you now." The crowd of patients erupted in spontaneous applause. Maria Santos wiped tears from her eyes. Even the teenagers looked up from their phones to witness justice being served in real time. "Dr. Washington," Rodriguez reported with professional respect, "EKG shows ST elevation in leads 2, 3, and AVF. Consistent with inferior wall MI. Prep the cath lab," Jeremiah ordered. and page Dr. Mitchell for emergency intervention. Tell him it's my mother." The machinery of world-class cardiac care swung into motion. What should have happened 2 hours ago was finally happening now, but Rosa's condition had stabilized enough to expect full recovery. Pemberton remained frozen in place, security flanking him like bookends. His pristine white coat seemed to mock him now, a symbol of authority he had abused and lost forever. "Dr. Pemberton?" Jeremiah's voice carried the weight of institutional power. "You're suspended pending investigation. Your privileges are revoked effective immediately. You'll surrender your badge, Idaho, and access cards to security." "Please." Pemberton's voice cracked with desperation. "I made a mistake. I was having a bad night. This isn't who I am. This is exactly who you are." Jeremiah's words were surgical in their precision. "And now everyone knows it." The phones kept recording as Pemberton was escorted away, his head hanging in shame. The man who had strutted through the ER like a king now shuffled toward administrative exile like a condemned prisoner. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jeremiah addressed the waiting room with quiet authority, "I apologize for what you witnessed tonight. This hospital will do better, starting immediately." Another round of applause filled the ER. Patients who had waited in fear now saw hope. Nurses who had worked under Pemberton's toxic leadership finally felt safe to do their jobs properly. Rosa squeezed Jeremiah's hand as they wheeled her toward the cardiac unit. "I'm proud of you, baby. Your daddy would be proud, too. Rest now, Mom. Justice is just getting started." As the automatic doors closed behind Rosa's gurney, Jeremiah's phone buzzed with messages from news outlets. The story was already breaking nationally. By morning, Dr. Richard Pemberton would be the most hated man in America, and Rosa Washington would be alive to see it. Within 30 minutes, Pemberton's hospital access cards were deactivated. His office was sealed by security while HR personnel began boxing his personal items. The man who had terrorized patients and staff for 8 years was escorted from the building like a common criminal. "Badge and ID, doctor," Miguel Santos said with barely concealed satisfaction. His voice carried the weight of every discriminatory incident he'd witnessed over the years. Pemberton's hands shook as he surrendered the symbols of his authority. The gold badge that once opened every door now felt like lead in his palm. His medical career was over, finished by his own racist arrogance captured on dozens of phones. "This is a misunderstanding," Pemberton pleaded with hospital security. "I was following standard procedure. You can't destroy someone's career over one incident." "One incident?" Santos laughed bitterly. "Doctor, we've been documenting your incidents for years. Tonight just gave us the evidence we needed." The videos had already gone viral. #GetHimOut trending nationally with over 2 million views. News vans were pulling into the hospital parking lot as producers scrambled to cover the breaking story. Pemberton's racist rant was being dissected on every major network. Inside the cardiac unit, Rosa responded beautifully to treatment. The emergency angioplasty had cleared her blocked artery, restoring blood flow to her heart muscle. Dr. Patricia Mitchell, the hospital's top cardiologist, monitored her recovery with professional optimism. "Full recovery expected," Dr. Mitchell reported to Jeremiah. "The damage was minimal thanks to quick intervention. She'll be home in 3 days." Jeremiah nodded, relief flooding through him like warm water. His mother would survive, but the trauma of Pemberton's cruelty would take longer to heal. The psychological scars of medical discrimination cut deeper than physical wounds. Rodriguez approached with a stack of incident reports. "Dr. Washington, 43 witnesses have provided statements. 17 patients recorded video evidence. The documentation is overwhelming." "Good. Make sure everything goes to legal, HR, and the state medical board." Jeremiah's voice carried administrative authority now. "This can never happen again." The nursing staff moved with renewed energy and purpose. For years, they had watched Pemberton's discriminatory behavior, feeling powerless to challenge his authority. Now they finally had a leader who would protect them and their patients. "Doctor," called Janet Rodriguez, "Channel 7 News is requesting an interview. They want to discuss systematic racism in healthcare." "Schedule it for tomorrow. Tonight belongs to patient care." Jeremiah checked his phone, seeing hundreds of missed calls from media outlets. The story was exploding across social platforms faster than he could track. The hospital's emergency board meeting convened virtually at 2 a.m. Board members logged in from their homes, their faces grim as they reviewed the viral videos. Pemberton's behavior was indefensible, creating massive legal and financial liability for the institution. Immediate termination with cause, announced Board Chairman Dr. Robert Sterling. Effective immediately. Legal will handle the aftermath. Hospital phone lines were overwhelmed with calls, some from reporters seeking statements, others from former patients sharing their own stories of discriminatory treatment. The floodgates had opened, and years of suppressed complaints poured out. "We're getting reports from other patients," reported legal counsel Sarah Adams via video conference. "Similar incidents dating back years. This could become a class action lawsuit." Pemberton sat in his BMW in the hospital parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and former colleagues. His medical career was over, but the consequences were just beginning. His wife called at 2:17 a.m. "Richard, it's all over Facebook. The neighbors are talking. What did you do?" The social destruction was swift and merciless. His country club membership would be revoked by morning. Medical colleagues were already distancing themselves. The racist doctor who denied care to a dying woman had become a national pariah overnight. Inside the hospital, transformation was already beginning. Jeremiah instituted immediate reforms, mandatory bias training for all staff, community oversight committees, and zero-tolerance policies for discriminatory behavior. The culture that had protected Pemberton was being dismantled in real time. "Dr. Washington," a young resident approached nervously, "the nursing staff wants to thank you. They've been afraid to speak up for years." "That fear ends tonight," Jeremiah replied firmly. "This hospital serves everyone equally, or it serves no one at all." Rosa was sleeping peacefully in the cardiac ICU, monitors showing strong, steady vital signs. The woman who had been denied care was now receiving the finest treatment available. Justice was being served one heartbeat at a time. By dawn, Pemberton's medical license would be under investigation. His malpractice insurance would be canceled. And Rosa Washington would wake up to a world where her son had the power to ensure no family would suffer what they had endured. The reversal was complete, but the real justice was just beginning. 3 weeks later, the FBI's Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation into Metropolitan General Hospital. Special Agent Patricia Carter arrived with a team of federal investigators, their black SUVs lining the hospital parking lot like a scene from a crime drama. "We're investigating pattern and practice violations of federal civil rights law," Agent Carter announced to the assembled media. "The Pemberton incident appears to be part of a larger systemic problem." The investigation moved with federal efficiency. Agents interviewed staff members who had remained silent for years, their testimonies revealing a culture of discrimination that extended far beyond one racist doctor. Electronic medical records were subpoenaed, revealing statistical disparities in treatment times, pain medication administration, and discharge rates based on race. 47 documented cases, Agent Carter reported to the Justice Department. Pattern of discriminatory treatment spanning 8 years. Multiple violations of federal civil rights statutes. The evidence was overwhelming. Black patients waited an average of 43 minutes longer for pain medication. Hispanic families were questioned about immigration status before receiving emergency care. Asian patients were dismissed as drug-seeking at twice the rate of white patients with identical symptoms. Dr. Pemberton's world collapsed, systematically, legally, completely. The Wayne County Prosecutor's Office filed criminal charges: willful deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and reckless endangerment. Each charge carried potential federal prison time. "This isn't just medical malpractice," announced Prosecutor Michael Johnson at a packed press conference. "This is attempted murder disguised as healthcare administration." The courtroom was standing room only when Pemberton's preliminary hearing began. Rosa Washington sat in the front row, her presence a living reminder of his cruelty. Jeremiah held her hand as prosecutors presented video evidence that made jurors gasp audibly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Assistant DA Sandra Lopez addressed the grand jury, "you will see a doctor watch a woman die while refusing treatment based solely on the color of her skin." The viral videos played on courtroom monitors, capturing every racist comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment of deliberate cruelty. Jurors watched in horror as Pemberton denied care to a dying woman while medical equipment sat unused mere feet away. "Get him out of my ER," Pemberton's recorded voice echoed through the silent courtroom. "We don't have beds for people like that." 23 victims testified during the grand jury proceedings. Maria Santos described watching her husband die after 6-hour delays for cardiac care. Dorothy Williams, the hospital cleaning lady, revealed years of observing discriminatory treatment. Miguel Santos provided security footage showing systematic patterns of abuse. "He killed my husband with paperwork," Maria sobbed into the courtroom microphone, "just like he tried to kill Mrs. Washington." The medical board hearings ran parallel to criminal proceedings. Expert witnesses testified that Pemberton's delays violated every standard of emergency medicine. Dr. Patricia Mitchell explained how each minute of delay increased Rosa's risk of permanent cardiac damage or death. By any measure of medical practice, Dr. Mitchell testified, Dr. Pemberton's actions constituted gross negligence rising to the level of criminal conduct. The state medical board voted unanimously to revoke Pemberton's license permanently. Board chairman Dr. Robert Hayes read the decision with obvious disgust. Dr. Pemberton has demonstrated unfitness to practice medicine through systematic discrimination that endangered patient lives. Civil litigation exploded across multiple fronts. Rosa's case became the centerpiece of a massive class action lawsuit representing 67 patients who had suffered discriminatory treatment. Attorney Gloria Hernandez filed suit seeking $50 million in damages. "This isn't about money," Hernandez explained at a press conference. "This is about ensuring no family ever suffers what the Washingtons endured." The hospital's insurance company settled quickly, paying $23 million to avoid trial. Rosa received $5 million personally, money she immediately donated to establish a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing healthcare careers. "Education is the only way to prevent this," Rosa announced at the scholarship ceremony. "We need doctors who look like the communities they serve." National media coverage intensified daily. 60 Minutes aired a special investigation titled Code Blue: Racism in Emergency Medicine. CNN's medical correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta called Pemberton's behavior the most egregious case of medical discrimination in modern American history. Academic institutions responded swiftly. Harvard Medical School invited Jeremiah to speak at their diversity conference. The American Medical Association passed new guidelines requiring bias training for all members. Medical schools nationwide incorporated the Pemberton case into their ethics curricula. "This case represents a watershed moment," declared Dr. Lisa Johnson, president of the National Medical Association. "We can no longer pretend that racism doesn't exist in healthcare." Pemberton's personal destruction was total and public. His medical malpractice insurance was canceled, making him uninsurable. His membership in professional organizations was revoked. Former colleagues refused to associate with him, treating him like a contagious disease. His family life imploded under the pressure. His wife filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and public humiliation. His children changed their names to avoid association with their father's crimes. The country club membership his grandfather had held for 60 years was permanently revoked. Federal sentencing arrived 6 months later. Judge Maria Rodriguez sentenced Pemberton to 3 years in federal prison, the maximum allowed under sentencing guidelines. The courtroom erupted in applause as bailiffs led him away in handcuffs. "Your actions represented the worst of American healthcare," Judge Rodriguez declared. "You violated your oath, betrayed your profession, and nearly killed an innocent woman because of racial hatred." The institutional transformation at Metropolitan General became a national model. Jeremiah implemented comprehensive reforms, community oversight boards, mandatory bias training, patient advocacy programs, and statistical monitoring of treatment disparities. "Every patient deserves dignity and excellent care," Jeremiah announced at the hospital's reform ceremony. "We're proving that healthcare equity isn't just possible, it's profitable and essential." Patient satisfaction scores soared to record highs. Community trust was slowly rebuilding through transparency and accountability. The hospital's reputation transformed from cautionary tale to success story, attracting top medical talent from across the nation. Rosa's recovery became complete and inspiring. She testified before Congress about healthcare discrimination, her voice carrying the moral authority of someone who had nearly died from institutional racism. Her testimony helped pass the Healthcare Equity Act, strengthening federal protections against medical discrimination. "I lived through segregation," Rosa told the packed congressional hearing room. "I thought those days were over. But racism adapts, evolves, and hides behind professional degrees and institutional policies. The ripple effects spread nationwide. Hospitals implemented new protocols to prevent discrimination. Medical schools reformed their admissions and curricula. The Pemberton case became shorthand for institutional racism in healthcare, a cautionary tale taught in ethics classes worldwide. Justice had been served completely, systematically, and permanently. But more importantly, the system itself was changing to ensure no family would ever suffer what the Washingtons had endured. 1 year later, Rosa Washington stood at the podium of the newly named Rosa Washington Center for Patient Advocacy at Metropolitan General Hospital. Her voice carried the same authority that once commanded third-grade classrooms, now addressing medical students from across the nation. "When my son carried me into this emergency room," Rosa began, her words echoing through the packed auditorium, "I was dying, not from my heart attack, but from a doctor's hatred." The audience sat in reverent silence. Medical students, nurses, and physicians filled every seat, witnessing the transformation of institutional racism into institutional justice. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating Rosa's face as she shared her story with quiet dignity. Jeremiah watched from the side stage, his chest swelling with pride. Under his leadership, Metropolitan General had become a beacon of healthcare equity. Patient satisfaction scores reached historic highs. Treatment disparities had virtually disappeared. The hospital attracted top talent specifically because of its commitment to justice. "My generation fought segregation," Rosa continued. "But we didn't eliminate bias. We just drove it underground where it festered in professional policies and institutional practices." The statistics told the story of transformation. Emergency department wait times were now equal across all racial groups. Pain medication was administered based on medical need, not skin color. Patient advocacy programs ensured every voice was heard and respected. Dr. Pemberton was serving his federal prison sentence at a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. His medical career was over, his reputation destroyed, his family scattered. The racist doctor who had denied care to a dying woman was now forbidden from practicing medicine anywhere in the United States. "But this isn't a story about one bad doctor," Rosa emphasized, her teacher's instincts guiding the lesson. "This is about a system that allowed hatred to flourish behind closed doors." The civil rights investigation had expanded nationwide. 12 hospitals faced federal scrutiny for discriminatory practices. The Healthcare Equity Act provided new tools for prosecution and prevention. Medical schools implemented mandatory bias training and diverse admissions requirements. Rosa's scholarship fund had grown to $2 million, supporting 47 minority students pursuing healthcare careers. Each recipient committed to serving underserved communities, ensuring the next generation of doctors would reflect the diversity of their patients. "When people ask me about forgiveness," Rosa said, addressing the question that followed her everywhere, "I tell them that justice and forgiveness aren't opposites, they're partners." The transformation extended beyond healthcare. Rosa's story became a symbol of resistance against institutional racism in all its forms. Schools taught her case in civics classes. Corporate diversity programs used her testimony as training material. Her courage inspired countless others to speak truth to power. Jeremiah approached the podium as Rosa concluded her remarks. The son who had remained silent to protect his mother now used his voice to protect all patients. His calm strength in the face of hatred had become legendary in medical circles. "My mother taught me that dignity isn't something you demand," Jeremiah told the audience. "It's something you demonstrate. And when institutions fail to provide that dignity, we have an obligation to change those institutions." The applause was thunderous, sustained, and emotional. Medical students wiped tears from their eyes. Seasoned physicians nodded with newfound understanding. The message was clear: health care is a human right, and human rights require constant vigilance. Outside the auditorium, reporters waited for interviews. The story continued to generate national attention, inspiring documentary films, academic studies, and legislative action. Rosa and Jeremiah had become inadvertent activists, their trauma transformed into a tool for justice. "What's next for you?" asked a reporter from CNN. "The work continues," Jeremiah replied simply. "Every day we choose between justice and indifference. We choose justice." Rosa added her wisdom with a smile. "And we teach our children to choose justice too. That's how we break the cycle." The cameras captured their final words as the sun set over Detroit. The city that had struggled with racial division was now home to a hospital that proved change was possible. The emergency room where Rosa had nearly died was now a sanctuary where every patient received equal care. As they walked toward the parking garage, Rosa squeezed her son's hand. "Your daddy would be so proud, baby. We turned our pain into purpose. We're not done yet, Mom. This is just the beginning." The story of Rosa and Jeremiah Washington had become more than viral content. It had become a movement, a mandate, a promise that dignity and justice were non-negotiable human rights. Now it's your turn. Have you ever witnessed discrimination in healthcare or any other setting? What did you do? Share this story if it moved you. Subscribe for more stories of justice served and communities standing up for what's right. Tell us in the comments, how do you think we can make healthcare more equitable for everyone? Because Rosa Washington went to the emergency room for a heart attack and was denied care because of the color of her skin. Her son was the new chief medical officer, but she didn't know that yet. If you had witnessed this happening to someone's grandmother, mother, or sister, would you have had the courage to speak up? And more importantly, what are you going to do the next time you see injustice happening right in front of you? Sometimes justice delayed is not justice denied. It's justice documented, justice amplified, and justice served. Real change happens when good people refuse to stay silent.
At Black Voices Uncut, we don't polish away the pain or water down the message. We tell it like it is because the truth deserves nothing less. If today's story spoke to you, click like, join the conversation in the comments, and subscribe so you'll be here for the next Uncut Voice.